I'm good. From what I hear, oh man, okay. Let's do this a third time. Everybody ready? Okay. Welcome to the second Saturday Artist Talk. This has been a heck of a morning. Thank you all for your patience. All the technical problems have since seemingly been solved. All of our outward people that are watching this at home and texting us that it's going poorly, hopefully we'll stop doing that now that it is active and running and everything's moving forward. I've already thanked you twice, once in silence and once with no video. Donald Fortescue, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for this wonderful exhibition, and thanks for being here this beautiful Saturday morning. And thanks for your patience. So the second Saturday Artist Talk is a way that I can connect an audience to the history of an artist. And so this is not a traditional artist talk. It is more just a conversation between two people that just got to know each other over several months while putting up an exhibition. And my goal is that this sits in both Donald's archive and Aggregate Space's archive, as well as in all of your minds, as this little snippet of extra information that you have when you think about Donald's work. And I hope that you can look back upon it and see what you were thinking about this work today, way back in 2021. Hopefully in the future when you watch it. So it's the first one of these that we've done live in a long time, and as appropriate, there were plenty of problems, but all solved. Thank you, audience. Thank you those at home that had the patience to sit through that, especially when it must have been very frustrating and it looked like we were playing, but we weren't yet. So, but what's nice is that in the future, we'll just cut that off on the YouTube channel, and it'll just start like there was no problem whatsoever. Donald, I guess the first question I want to ask you is to talk about your history and your relationship with science. I know that your first degree was scientific, and you had we were exchanging boyhood dreams that were like reinvestigating in adulthood, and you talked about wanting a great telescope when you were a kid, and how you finally got one recently.
Yeah, it took a while. It took a while to get a telescope because of COVID-19. Sort of supply chains have been poor, so I finally got my beautiful telescope. So that's a childhood dream realized.
So you grew up in Australia. All of your education is from Australia, right? You were born in Sydney, or born?
I was born in Sydney and raised on the south coast, south of Sydney. In this really, looking back on it now, this idyllic situation that was a place called Stanmore Park, which is about an hour's drive south of Sydney, and it was in the edge of the Royal National Park, which is the second oldest national park in the world, next to Yosemite.
Oh wow!
And it's a really beautiful location on a beach, in this kind of really pristine location. In some ways, it's also a centre for Australia, one of Australia's centre for coal mining. So it's the juxtaposition of kind of industrial land use and national parks right next to each other from early part of my youth. So it was a great place to grow up, to be, very sensitive to environmental, situations. And the kind of the stretch of the ocean horizon is something I woke up to every morning. So I had a very, very privileged childhood in a fairly working class neighbourhood. It was a strange mix, strange social and cultural and natural cultural mix. And so I really wanted to, because of that, partly because of my father was really into natural history. I got really into walking up and down the beach and seeing seals climbing up on the beach and finding strange things washed up, and just being super excited by what I saw in the ocean. So my first dream was really to become and that was around the same time as Jacques Cousteau was plying the seas, in the early 60s, and watching his documentaries really inspired me to become a marine biologist. And I never actually became a marine biologist, but it set me on that path. And then, as you mentioned, in my teens, when I was at high school, when everyone else was listening to rock and roll and taking drugs and having a wild time, I was out in the backyard with my handmade telescope observing the planets. I was the quintessential nerd, before that word was invented or thought of, and definitely before it was cool in any way whatsoever. And so when I went into university, I went in initially wanting to be get involved in astronomy and astrophysics. That was my kind of my path. And then, as usual with the path, it got disrupted. My mother died when I was 19, and so that really put me into a tailspin. And it kind of really made me rethink what I wanted to do with my life. And I got back into biology and botany and zoology. They were the things that I was really passionate about. I also sucked at physics, and so it sort of like was a really bad move for me to go down that path. And so I got back into botany and zoology and got my first degree in kind of evolutionary biology and ecosystem, early ecosystem thinking was, this was in the 70s, so those terms were just freshly minted. This was what, 15 years after continental drift was first really kind of thought of as being true.
Oh, right.
Wow. So, the sort of science has changed a lot in half a century. And so I worked as a botanist for about 8, 9, 10 years in Australia. But I found being kind of in the corporate world, I guess, of science really stultifying. You had to get your master's degree and then get your PhD and then wait for some other professor to die to be able to get their position. And science is badly funded, almost as badly funded as the arts, and so it was a real dog-eat-dog situation. And around that time, I started getting into. This was at the 70s. I was making my own clothes and making my own tofu and I was a hippie basically, and so I really got into self-sufficiency and thinking about kind of like the craft of living, I guess. And so I made the transition at that stage to getting really excited by building things and constructing things. And I think as Annie Albers said in a quote that I saw in New York last week, I got really excited by engaging with the stuff the world is made out of. They're kind of like wood and ceramic and food, and science seemed really like a long way away from all of that. So I did a about face and went back to art school at what seemed to me the grand old age of 27, and became a furniture maker and woodworker. And so that's where most of my career as an artist and designer has been, through that medium, as a maker and craftsperson and designer.
Your work, and so that brought you to the States. It brought you to CCA as the design.
So I worked as an independent kind of, in Australia we have the term designer maker. It's the crafts in Australia are much more associated with the design world than the art world. So I was doing a lot of architectural commissions and doing some exhibition work as well, doing speculative work and putting it out there at a studio just on the outskirts of Canberra, which is where I did my undergraduate training in furniture design. And I was enjoying that and it was really excited, but being in the studio all the time was also a little bit stultifying. I felt it really kind of isolating just to wake up in the morning and go to the workshop and work my heart out and then come home at night and wash the sawdust off and then get up and do it again. There was a repetition to that was starting to get to me as well. So at that stage I undertook a master's degree in sculpture and was really interested in much more of a taking my craft work and taking it into a kind of more conceptual bent, I guess. And that master's degree was really thinking about furniture as objects in the landscape, the domestic landscape. That was the kind of the process that I was thinking about. And so I started building objects that had they were man-made objects, obviously, made by me, but they also had natural processes like patinas and burning and things that I was getting from the natural world. Some of them were constructed out of piles of sand and things like that. So juxtaposing the man-made with natural elements, but also natural processes was the kind of key part of that part of my master's degree. And so that's also led me on to getting back into kind of the role of nature in as a really integral part of what I do and my work and my interests as well. So I think it's been I guess getting back to your initial point was that I think of nowadays in my late 60s I think of the role of the artist is to really to be a synthesizer of a life experience. We've all had these really unique experiences in our lives, and people often ask me as a teacher, how do I find an original voice? And I've always really loved the notion of origin as being part of original. You kind of, David Nash, the British sculptor, pointed this out to me years ago, this notion that original means that it comes from the origins. And so what is the origin of our creativity? Where does that come from? And it's not because original, we think it means nobody's thought of it before, but that's not the case. The best work, I think, is where people actually have thought around it before, maybe, but you've just found this sweet spot where nobody's actually thought of that particular move or that particular way of framing something. And the only way you can get there is to know what's happening around that, to be really aware of, that in my case, the world of science, the world of natural science, the landscape stretching across the Pacific, across the Atlantic. I've traveled the world a lot, and so I'm always looking at the world and the natural textures and the man-made textures as part of that. And so, now I think of my work as an artist is to synthesize that and to put all that out there, and that's what this show is really trying to do in some ways.
Yeah, I think there's something to your work about posing a question in a way that almost the way a scientist would, except where the result is by design almost nonsensical. With some of these pieces, where it's like the thing that you're capturing is evidence, but not to prove a point. It's like you're looking at it this kind of backwards way, and I connect with that because I kind of personally feel that art is this this way with which human beings can ask questions that have no answer, and can put can welcome others into that world of just being okay with question. Whereas you with a science background and many other people that have read a lot of science or have a science background understand that their goal is in fact the same. But once enough of those questions are asked, a consensus toward an answer begins to build. Yeah.
Well, thank you for telling me my work is backward and nonsensical. I deeply appreciate that perspective. But I think I understand what you're saying.
I think about the lenses, right? The piece that's on this piece for those of you at home, and how it is like you're making this relationship that has almost everything aligned. Except for the fact that
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work, and yours is this man-made thing. But I think it harkens back to your building your own telescope. There's things that speaks to in your personality and the just the amusement of it.
I think the area that I'm most focused on in science at the moment is astrophysics, and the thing that I really appreciate about I think my pathway into it was just being so impressed with the instruments that are being built. As a craftsperson, seeing things like the Large Hadron Collider and the South Pole Telescope and Hubble Space Telescope and the Mars rovers and stuff. I think they're just as crafted objects that, you know, I go into my studio and I'm, you know, sawing up a little bit of metal and I think, what am I doing? I'm an idiot, you know, like someone can build a robot that goes to Mars and unfolds and walks around, you know, like I'm so low tech compared to that. And so that's, you know, that's where the kind of absurdity comes in, because I feel like as a single artist working in my own studio, sometimes with an assistant, with the help of a lot of friends, you know, I'm a pretty good fabricator, but compared to that, I'm a moron. I'm a chimpanzee, you know. It's like I'm so at the other end of the spectrum, and I see what, and for me that comes from this amazing collaboration of technicians and, you know, multi-million-dollar support from my taxes, your taxes, and the drive of the people involved to realise the, you know, this absurd vision that they have. And so, you know, to get people on board with that absurd vision. So I think it's right. It's not dissimilar to what an artist does. You know, an artist has this kind of vision, or kind of, you know, this idea, and then you have to rope other people into getting on board with you. I managed to rope you into giving me this great space to show the work. I've managed to rope these poor people in on a beautiful Saturday morning to come in and listen. You know, it's about community, you know, and the thing that I'm so impressed with the contemporary science world is that they can build this incredible community across multiple nations with thousands of people collaborating to generate an outcome which is just kind of almost this kind of absurd vision, you know, this kind of that a few visionary, you know, they are visionary scientists who have had this desire to build something, and they've managed to rope other people into that vision and make it happen. You know, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, well, and I think, you know, when I think about the array that's capturing the cosmic rays and the muons, I mean, I think about, like, you know, I think my first experience with that was on a show that was probably showing the one at the Exploratorium, but seeing it like on Mr. Wizard or something as a kid, and like having my mind blown that this fog, you know, in this little box,
like a cloud chamber,
was collecting, you know, evidence.
That's my latest project. I'm working on a cloud chamber.
Oh, are you really?
I'm working on a cloud chamber.
But I just like, I love the idea that, like, cloud chambers have evolved to this thing that perhaps you could just kind of describe that array and how, just how massive it is, and how
I like that. I like that comparison, actually, because you know, cloud chambers, for those of you who don't know, basically are a fog of alcohol that's perched above a slab of very cold material, normally dry ice, or sometimes just a frozen, like a electronically refrigerated slab. And what happens is that cosmic rays and particles coming from the atmosphere and from outer space, as they pass through the fog, they cause the fog to condense like a cloud, which is why they're called cloud chambers. And so as you set it up, there's nothing, you're just staring at this fog in a box and you think, this isn't working. What was I thinking? I'm going to go upstairs and have a beer and do something else. And all of a sudden, you see this thing happen. You see this, like an electron, or maybe a kind of an alpha particle, which is an atomic nucleus, whiz through the fog and forms this like little contrail through the fog. And you realise you're seeing the outcome of a subatomic particle, you know, moving through this thing, this spaceship constructed, you know, and it's magical. It really is magical.
Yeah, and they have different behaviors based on the type of particle, and so you start to like become familiar with what's coming through.
Yeah, and some of them, you know, all of them don't last very long, and so they have a very short life, and you can see the life as they pass. And so, but the thing I love about that is it's analog.
Yeah.
So that's that's kind of the position that I've set myself up with respect to these scientific institutions. In most cases, I'm trying to work analog. Right. And analog science doesn't exist much anymore. It's a kind of a 19th century, early 20th century thing, where you'd set up two brass slits and put a drop of water on it, and then kind of project a light through it.
Yeah, well, because it was about proof for so long. Right. It wasn't about mathematics and actually collecting of data,
Yeah,
which is what it's about
and sometimes
now.
it was information that would be contradictory. You know, you'd sort of go, oh, well, oh, hang on, that's, now what do I do? And you'd have to build another apparatus. And so there's that aspect of it which I really like, the fact that you don't, the apparatus is a constantly evolving thing. It's never resolved. It's never a product like industrial design product where you've finally ironed out all the bugs and there's the thing. It's this constantly evolving and changing this kind of sculptural installation, which is always being modified by the people who participate in it, the scientists, and the data that's coming from it. You know, the data is never what you want it to be. It's always a mystery. Or if it is what you want it to be, it's like, damn, like they did with the Large Hadron Collider. One of the big quandaries about that giant multi-billion-dollar instrument is that it's not producing anything they weren't expecting. That's a big problem. You know, they're expecting it to do something weird, and it's kind of not. You know, not weird enough. You know, and so that means the standard model of particle physics is actually right. That's no good. You can't build a career as a scientist by proving that someone else is right.
Yeah,
you have to prove they were wrong.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's how you get the Nobel Prize. Not saying, yeah, Einstein's a genius. That's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah,
you
right.
know, so and so there's this mixture of things. You know, there's this kind of prototypical instrument that's constantly evolving and changing, and there's this desire, a little bit like what's in the fine arts of an avant-garde. You have to kind of always be replacing the people that have gone before. You're disproving what's happened before. That's how you build a career, not by proving what's happened before. And so I'm really excited by the analog instruments. Some of the pieces here are based on, there's these small pieces over there, the heliospheres, heliographs, which are wooden bowls that catch the sun, that were designed to operate at the South Pole and to burn the path of the sun. They're based on a Victorian instrument that was built exactly the same way, the Campbell Stakes heliograph, and it was a really early recorder of the sun's energy. But now all of that stuff at the South Pole is mostly digital. You know, they just have a thing that's up there that's recording that information incredibly accurately. But one of the reasons I built those was that at the South Pole they still operate some original Campbell heliographs. And they're these brass instruments that are up on the roof of the South Pole, and they have little paper strips on them that, you know, record the passage of the sun, and a scientist comes up at midday and pulls the 2 paper strips out and puts 2 new paper strips in and takes them down and clips them together and writes the date on them, and then at the end of summer all of those get packaged up in a crate and sent back to the NOAA headquarters in Denver or wherever it is, and so there's still, for 70 years now, they've been collecting these little strips of paper with this kind of record. You know,
why are they still?
Exactly, it's it's practically the last analog instrument alive at the South Pole. You know, and the reason for that is that they've got 70 years worth of data from that instrument.
Oh, so they can really
correlate. You know, that's a baseline.
Yeah.
And so the baseline is how we now understand that carbon dioxide is increasing rapidly, because those instruments have been in location for long enough that we've got that baseline information spanning now 70 years again to be able to determine that information. So that sort of multi-lifetime duration of recording and the kind of the culture that goes with it is also something that I find really fascinating, and relates back to, you know, what we're doing here as well as artists. You know, we're all, we honour Duchamp like scientists honour Einstein. You know, there's people who just made these incredible breakthroughs in thinking and the way we think about the world and cultural practice. You know, the ready-made, that's E equals MC squared, the science world. You know, it was a quantum shift in people's thinking about how you could behave as an artist, and so contemporary artists have this incredibly rich culture that we're drawing on as part of what we're bringing into that mix as well. You know.
So when you went back to study sculpture, did you feel like that was you expressed feeling like these other things were more isolating, more not what you expected them to be, but when you were in that world, getting a master's degree with other people that were also kind of exploring sculpture, did you finally feel like, oh, this is the place for me? or was it, did you stay kind of an outsider in terms of your feeling, you know, as you went through that program?
Yes and no. You know, I think it might be my nature. I don't know. I think I'm always on the wrong end of the stick. You know, somehow. You know,
we all are, I think.
Yeah. You know, there's a number of people in the audience here who are crafts people as well. And the crafts is a classic underdog. You know,
yeah,
it's
right.
like it's a terrible place to be if you want to be taken seriously as an artist. You know, and there's been a battle right through the 20th century, especially the late 20th century, for the crafts to be recognised as an art form, and then a contradictory, counter tendency in the late 20th century of fine artists to start using you know, raw materials and engage with the materiality of the world, as Annie Albers said again, and to start to use, you know, textiles and fabrics and, you know, clay, and, you know, so those two things have been kind of, you know, orbiting around each other in this strange power dance. You know, basically it's, if you can get into the Museum of Modern Art, you've won the game. So how do you play that game? You know, and that's the art industry over the top of all of that. But at the same time, we're all negotiating our place in that as well, and trying to support our creative lives.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt, you know, I went from being a craftsperson into being a sculptor who came from the craft world.
Right.
You know, I didn't go through the Yale sculpture program. I went through a woodworking program in Canberra, and then my master's degree was from the University of Wollongong. You know, like a very prestigious. You know, everyone's heard of the University of Wollongong. Not. You know, it was a great program I went through, but you know, it's not the path to becoming, you know, a kind of a famous contemporary sculptor. And now, you know, I'm working in this realm, the art science realm, which is also at a kind of I think it's a really interesting realm, but it's it hardly has any recognition in the gallery world or the museum world, and it's so it's at this strange kind of interstitial, culturally interstitial space that I find really interesting. I've always found that kind of relationship between craft and sculpture really interesting, and the relationship between, you know, that kind of contemporary art interest in materiality and the crafts interest in conceptual basis for their work. That kind of mix is really interesting, and if you navigate this kind of weird line that's across those barriers, you don't fit in either realm.
Yeah.
You're always on the border.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm from Australia. You know, it's the southern hemisphere, a colonial outpost on the southern hemisphere. It's you know, I've just felt like I'm on the border of a lot of different things throughout my creative life.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have that in common. I think that's the same stuff I and by nature aggregate is interested in, is those things that are just maybe aren't quite, like they wouldn't fit in by a standard definition.
Yeah.
You know, or by the, you know, if you were to go to a place that says art, those things wouldn't be in the front.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's always been what we've been interested in, is how do we bring those things to this place.
Yeah, and that's what attracted me to aggregate space in the first place, by walking in and just going, cool. I know where this work fits in the world. It's super interesting, and you know, place where, and you know, just looking around, you know, two-dimensional works on paper, you know, two-dimensional works on aluminum, fabricated objects, you know, sound, video, you know, it's rare to be able to present all those things in one spaces. And for me, the joy of this show has been for that all to be here and it to be cohesive. You know, for it to all look like that they're, you know, the connection between all of them is, I think, apparent when you walk through the space. They don't seem irrelevant. They don't seem disconnected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we worked hard on that, on trying to make sure that there was always a relationship between the works. You know, that it wasn't just putting them in here because they existed. So when did you first come to the States? So what was the
97?
Yeah, and that was just for the CCA program, or was it? Did you?
Yeah, CCA facilitated it, but it was, you know, I've always really liked working in different places, you know, I hadn't really taught full time until I came to the States, and but it gets back to your question a little while ago, being involved in a master's degree and starting to do part-time teaching. I loved having that the wider community, to be engaging with students and to be engaging with other professors and to be in different places and to locate, to start to have a practice that went beyond just my local community was really important to me. And CCA seemed to offer that in spades. I was coming to San Francisco, and I was going to be on the west coast of the US, and I was super impressed when I first came here. Everyone had this super supportive. Australians are a bit. If anyone from Australia is listening, at least at that stage, Australians were inclined to be negative. We have this thing in Australia called the tall poppy syndrome, which is, the tall poppies are the ones that get cut. And so you don't stick your neck out, you don't make a noise, you don't kind of draw attention to yourself. And it's a kind of, Protestant British thing a little bit as well, but it also comes, I guess, from our, history in Australia of, of kind of just not wanting to, being a rabble rouser would get you into trouble. You don't make waves, and partly it was conservative, environment that I grew up in as well. And so coming to the States was great. Everyone was just like, you come up with an idea, and everyone was just going, "That's amazing! That's really cool. You should do that. What can I do to help?" And it was just like, really? I was really surprised by that, and so I really felt that there was this energy and enthusiasm to take on, and I think it's probably West Coast, Northern California, Silicon Valley, let's get behind that kind of notion. I found it so refreshing when I first came here. And I still find it refreshing. I've since realised that sometimes the follow-through isn't there behind those enthusiasms. You still have to. There's still a lot of pushing to get something up and running.
Sign this.
But so that really drew me here, and being in the States, it was it's such an amazing cultural amalgam, and I've lived in West Oakland pretty much the whole time I've lived here, and being part of the cultural mix in West Oakland is sometimes shocking, but most of the time incredibly exciting and incredibly energizing. Coming from at that stage, more monocultural Australia. Australia's changed a lot in the 27 years I've lived here, but at the time it was much more monocultural, and especially white British culture was very dominant at that stage, even though there were other cultural actions at play. So coming to a more culturally diverse place was really exciting to me as well.
And then CCA was all in. Yep.
Donald's mic keeps cutting in and out, so just make sure it's all secure.
Oh, it might be just time.
I'll try not to. Thank you.
We'll please let me know if something else goes on. I've been checking it, so it might be an issue of plugging that thing back in. Let me just do that. Oh, now that my foot's completely asleep. Let's not do that. Okay. We're gonna just see how it goes. What a morning. So I was going to just ask, CCA was all in Oakland.
Well, this is a good, next time there's a live talk here, come to the live talk and you'll hear every single word.
Yeah, including all the drama, all the behind the scenes. You get, it's like watching the special features before the show.
So yeah, sorry.
Just Oakland. Oakland is, CCA was 100% in Oakland at that time?
No, it was in San Francisco as well. And so I came out to run the furniture design program. I was hired as the chair of the furniture design program at CCA, and the first act I did as that was move it to the San Francisco campus. We were just building a San Francisco campus at that point. So the furniture program was one of the new programs on the San Francisco campus and has been located there ever since.
So what sent you back to get your PhD?
I guess the cliche statement is a commitment to lifelong learning, but it's actually true in that sense as well. I sort of, as I said, I got my undergraduate degree fresh out of high school in science, and then I went back to art school at 27, and then I got my master's degree at 37. So I didn't make that. I was out as an artist working for a decade before I went and did my master's degree, which was really good for me because I'm a slow learner, I guess. It takes me a while to kind of like make the transitions and the shifts.
I'm going to switch you out of this one.
Oh, okay.
Because I think that one died.
Oh, really? It's still got a green light.
It does, but something's going on. And I'm going to just... I'll speak with volume and diction. Thank you, everyone. And hopefully that solves that.
You can keep your eye on the monitor with sound as well.
Yep.
And then being a professor and a teacher, I was always really jealous of the students. One of the jobs of being a professor is to dream up amazing, interesting classes and then inflict it on the students. And I always, I did a lot of learning while I've been here as well. I've learned a lot, from running those classes and setting up those classes, and then watching students thrive and struggle through through the things that I've dreamt up for them to do, and then modify and change that. But I started to be really interested in this art and science realm, and my wife Sandra Kelch, who's also an artist, also started off as a designer, a graphic designer, but was doing much more work in printmaking. We decided it would be a really good thing to do for us both to do PhDs at the same time, and use that as a transition for ourselves, so that Sandra would be able to dedicate herself to printmaking and to dive into the conceptual basis of it much more, and I would be able to explore this notion of art science as a place to work and to try and fish out concepts that were, from my point of view, in between art and science, that were fertile in both areas, and try and find an approach that would work for both realms in some ways. And so we undertook a PhD at the Australian National University, which is my alma mater for my undergraduate art degree. And so in some ways it was a bit going home-ish, going back to Canberra in Australia, where my first supervisor was actually someone who I used to teach with at that institution. And so it was familiar, which was helpful, but it was also really unfamiliar because we were in the depths of having to be students for the first time, and to really, both of us produced a 120-page written thesis, which you can download on my website and read if you're really interested. And just to kind of take a deeper dive into where we're both coming from, and also put it in the context of contemporary Australian discourse around it and around the visual arts, which is very different from here as well. So it was interesting to have a kind of a different academic, different cultural perspective on the work we were doing at the same time. And so we both finished in, just a couple of years ago, we finished our PhDs. Basically my degrees have been every 10 years through my adult life in some ways.
It's so admirable. I mean, I think as somebody that I dream of a time when I can go back, because it's the part of my life that I feel like was the most rewarding still, is that experience of learning.
And I think it is, I think that space, the academic degree space, it's got lots of problems, it's expensive to get at a higher degree. You have to abandon your life, as an educator at CCA. I see lots of divorces happen with, people doing their MFAs. It's a selfish time in a person's life to be able to dedicate yourself, and we expect that as educators as well. We expect people to give their all at that time, and it's a very special time in someone's life, I think, and it's mostly life-changing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's incredibly frustrating and tedious, and we think you wasted your time and money. That happens, but it's not as if our PhDs were a dream trip either. We were like, we had to had to jump through academic hoops. And you're like, really? What? Are you kidding me? What do we have to do that for? It was frustrating, but at the same time, our work wouldn't be where it is now if we hadn't gone through that experience.
Right.
And being able to, and it was great doing it as a couple actually, because a lot of people said doing a PhD is going to tear you apart. It's going to, you're not going to survive. But we became this two-person support team for each other because we're doing it at a distance, as well. So we could both go, okay, let's just live on granola and rice for the next 4 days. Is that okay with you? It's like, totally. Let's just do that. And we proofread each other's exegeses as they were coming along, and cried on each other's shoulders, and it was good. Mostly, Sandra would be kind of like really up, and everything was going well, and I'd be really down, and she'd take me up, and then, we'd switch, and so there was always one of us that was basically, okay to be able to keep us all going.
Yeah.
So it was a good. I recommend it as something to do as a couple. Actually, it's like, if you can find a common ground to do, it's a great project.
Yeah, like an art space, running an art space with your partner. Similar.
Yeah.
It's kind of there's a whirring sound, and I just think for sound quality and for the archive, I want to make sure that we're recording high quality. So I'm not sure when it's kind of whirring up and down, and it's muffled a little bit. So just adjust a little bit.
Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. I just want to make sure it's good for the archive.
Because the fan was on for a while, but that's off now. But there might be some.
I think it's because the Zoom died. That's irritating.
Well, I think it's fine. Otherwise, it's not a huge deal. But I just wanted to let. Okay.
No, I think we're just.
Or we could just stop the stream and then just chat.
No. We're not going to. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't know what caused this to reset, but it did. So the sound stopped coming out of the speakers too, I'm guessing, at some point. Yeah.
All these pearls of wisdom being wasted.
Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare. Ugh. We should just stick to the Zoom. What is that? No, you can hear me okay. Is that still not coming through though? Well, we're gonna just, we're gonna roll with it. That just screamed coming out. Boy. All right.
So which mic is mine?
They're both gone.
They're both gone.
They're both gone. As was happening earlier when I was preparing for this, I was a little nervous about that, but it looks like I was sort of okay. We're going to use this as a microphone.
Okay.
Oh, well, at least that's happening again. Well, okay.
It's working on this anyways.
Yeah.
So that's probably not bad anyways.
Yeah, I keep redlining, but okay. Well, we're just going to go with this, and I'm so terribly sorry that this has been so riddled with these ridiculous technical issues.
Okay, I know that's one of the issues, as I'm getting more and more involved in video work and sound work. It's a whole other arcane magical art that is so complicated.
I think what I find challenging is that they could go off without a hitch 20 times in a row using the exact same equipment, and then you have one like this, and everything that could possibly get tripped up gets tripped up. So
It all gets down to the whole noise signal thing, doesn't it?
yeah, signal noise. That's right. That's why we called your show this. We made you curse this show. Almost every signal that could possibly go wrong is going wrong. So do you, based on what you just said, so do you feel like it was this life-changing experience that you committed to? Like when you compare going through the PhD program to the previous times, like do you see that as like equally life-changing? Like, do you feel like you've come out of the other side of the PhD program with like a vastly different outlook, or do you feel like it just allowed you to commit your outlook to writing and to?
Yeah, I think it's more that. When I went into the PhD, I had a fairly clear idea about what I wanted to be doing. Where a lot of people don't. A lot of people come in and think they're going to do this, and then going through that process, they rethink what they do, and they kind of refine what they do, or they might change their process entirely, just like doing a master's degree in some ways. At least we don't really have PhDs. We do have some PhDs in practice-led research, as it's called in Australia, here in the US, but not many. So it's hard to get a PhD in painting or printmaking or sculpture here. There's limited number of programs. It's starting to grow, but in Australia and New Zealand and Europe and the UK, they're much more common. And in fact, in Australia, it's considered the terminal degree as an educator now as well. You have to have a PhD. And so I think that from my own personal experience, I came into it thinking I was going to go to the Arctic and the Antarctic as part of the work, and thinking I was going to build sculptural instruments that somehow interacted with the physical environment and also then reflected on or engaged with the scientific research that was happening at those locations. That was my plan, and that's what I did. So the writing was something that that was much more challenging, but also quite rewarding, and so it's changed my perspective a little bit in the sense that I actually like to do more curating and writing now than I would have done in the past. I'm more confident about doing that than I would have done in the past. I like the idea of, as part of the PhD as well, you do a lot of, what in science would be called kind of like literature search, where you don't do anything without finding out what everyone else has already done in that field first, and then you act, knowing that you can refer to, Conrad's paper from 1962 that was about blah blah, and so that gives you the cultural context which you can create original work. And so that happens in the fine arts as well. So I did a lot of research into people who are working in the natural world of their work and building instruments as part of their artistic practice and thinking about the history of that. And so, I've actually coming closer to my front burner is an exhibition around that now that's looking at how science is crafted, basically the craft of science, looking at these kind of amazing scientific instruments that are built, and a huge number of artists who actually craft these amazing instruments that engage with the natural world as well, and looking at their varied approaches and trying to find some lines through that. So that's something I probably wouldn't have thought about doing before doing the PhD, but now that's something that's on my mind to take on. In fact, in some ways it's more interesting than doing more of my own work, to kind of look at what other people are doing and bring it to an audience. I'd love to do that.
How do you? Let me know. I'd love to cheer you on. Have you thought about elaborating on your thesis into a book or anything?
Yeah. I think everyone who writes a PhD thinks it's going to be a bestseller, and maybe they could recompense some of the money they spent on the PhD with a bestseller. And there would be, the PhD itself is the exegesis you write is it's a very constructed document that it's like a haiku or something. It's like a really long haiku. It's got these formal constraints around it, it has to be, presented the third person, and all this sort of stuff, and there's lots of academic restraints around what you can and can't say, and how you support that, and it gives you a lot of license. You can quote from a lot of things which in a published document you can't, because you have to get authority to, it's not fair use if it's a commercial document, somehow. So it's a different fish. It looks like a fish, but it's not the same thing. So yeah, it'd be nice to, and I'd like to. I love the book. I love books. You know, the craft of books is a really lovely thing as well. And, you know, the idea of putting both Sandra and I have talked a lot about, you know, distilling something from the PhD and building it into a book. And that might happen, and this curatorial project is part of that, as well as a lot of research went into the PhD that would form the basis of the curatorial project too.
That's fantastic. I think since we got a late start, and this has been going on for quite a while. That's fantastic. It didn't seem like it for a long time because I was just burdened.
You should ask these guys.
Yeah. You weren't. Nobody else was sweating about microphone volumes. So I'm just open up to questions, but I want to talk a little bit about what's upcoming. So today, is the launch of the Zeman project, which is a funded project through California Arts Council that our previous programming communication manager, Shahid Sarus, is running. And it is a series of these 3 panel discussions of Southwest Asian, North African artists. And it's going to be 3 consecutive Saturdays at 2 p.m. And the first one is today at 2 p.m. On the topic of what is salon. And so this is this 3-part project, one of which is this documentation of all the Bay Area artists that are working from that region through a series of about 30-minute interviews that are going to show up on our YouTube channel. And then the Zeman Project panels, which are going to happen in 3 parts, and then there's going to be a website and some documentation afterwards of all of this work and connecting that community. So it's a really, really exciting project. She's been working on it forever, and again, it's going to go smoother than this because it's just going to be on Zoom. So that's happening, and then our next exhibition. So this show's only open for 1 more week. So if you have friends, send them on over next weekend. Or have them give us a call, and we can open it up sometime this week if they can't make it on next Saturday. But after that exhibition, we are going to move forward with Nassim Al-Khatam's exhibition. So that was another exhibition like Donald's that we started moving forward on before we lost our previous space. And so we kind of found a few artists that would be patient with us, and we could commit to something, and then they would be also patient, the fact that they were committing to an exhibition having no idea what space we were going to end up with. So Donald drew the short straw and ended up being the first show here, and Nassim is going to be the second. And so I cannot wait to see that show. It's going to be called I Sprout From My Wound. And Nassim's work is just this beautiful poetic work about how women are the real leaders of revolutions. And it's also equally multimedia, lots of photography, video, some sound work, big sculpture. It's going to be pretty incredible. And again, we're going to just keep moving the space forward and figuring out how to show work in here and learn about it together with artists one at a time. And I think that's it for my announcements. Barring, there's an Oakland Art Room event that's happening, but I don't think I need to talk about that. So let's just open this to questions. If anybody has any questions for Donald, I'd love to spend 15 minutes talking about this. And then after that, we'll tidy up these chairs and we'll turn all the sound work back on. For those of you that haven't experienced the show, you can get the full brunt of it, minus this pile of stuff that'll be in the corner. So any questions? That was too long of an intro for questions, that I made everyone forget their questions. Yeah, Tara.
Kind of difficult to form my own thinking into the question, but my thinking is revolving around this digital versus analog conversation, and also what is it? We always have like a sense of politics around the analog process because we need to observe things and then somehow set up things in analog way to record what's going on and then understand that without too much
No, I think it's, it's a really interesting question. Is this, what's the poetics of the analog, and how does that engage with the digital? I think that's, I think about that a lot, because obviously, I built this incredibly, analog instrument that has to physically be carried to the South Pole and tuned like a piano, and it's all made out of wood, and the wood expands and contracts with the moisture and temperature. So all of the stuff that comes from, it's a beautifully crafted object, and it comes from decades of craft experience as a maker, from my point of view. So it's embedded in all of that side of it. And so that's where a lot of the poetics of the analog comes from me, is that it embraces these long histories, human histories, cultural histories around instrument building, and building, tents and structures that we live within, and I love all those histories and stories, that play. One of my favourite stories about that is that I think of it as the Mars rover, which is a totally, analog thing, but totally digital in terms of what it yields. We can never experience being on Mars. We can just send our analog, there. That's an analog for us. The Mars rover. But in my case, the instrument is if the Wright brothers have dreamt it up. It's all made out of string and wire and bits of wood. And, it's this very 20th century, like 19th century version of what we're doing now with our robotic, spacecraft. But then there's, our recorder using digital recorders, and so when the sound is on in the space, it's a digital recording. It's just on a USB stick stuck into an output. And so how do you? I would love it. Really with the video work that's obviously a digital video recorded on digital on cameras, and I've done a lot of post processing in Photoshop, and all computer based. I really looked a lot into trying to do that in 16mm. It would have just been so good having that in film, and I love it when you walk into installations now and you get that, it's like, just so cool, and the fact that for me, to actually take reels of film down there and had to either process them down there and bring them back, it all conjures all the history of exploration and all those beautiful glass plates that Hurley did, for the Endurance expedition, and just that history of photography in Antarctica is amazing, and it's all analog up until the 21st century basically, and people are carrying glass plates and processing at sub-zero temperatures and the bilge of sailing ships. Amazing craft history is involved in all of that, So how do you bring that along and have it as a tangible, physical part of the work, at the same time as that we're dealing with the reality of, I flew down there and I was only there for a few days, and I couldn't lug that stuff with me, and I don't know how to use 16mm. It's beyond my experience, So, but cameras, I can handle a digital camera, So, and the piece I'm building at the moment, which is about to be shipped to Paris to be submerged into the Mediterranean Sea. It's an analog instrument, but it's held in a casing that's designed for digital instruments. I just got the casing and then stuck this analog instrument into it. But I'm going to use digital recorders to record its function, because I don't have any way for people to have a direct experience of that. When this instrument was set up at the South Pole, I had open days for it, and people came out and listened to it at the pole performing. But it was, a dozen people maybe have seen it perform in reality, because there weren't that many people at the South Pole, and even with the number of people at the South Pole, there weren't that many people interested in coming out and standing around in the freezing cold listening to my instrument, So, I wish people could experience it, but how do you? So a lot of my work is really about trying to give people a visceral experience of what it was like for me to be there, and to have that kind of, to conjure that up in some way. times. So having this object now as an artifact of that time, it's like you can imagine it standing next to it, and you can imagine hearing that sound, and you can see it in the landscape in the video as well. So it's, you know, we could lower the temperature and the air conditioning way down, and get even closer to the experience. How do you come to the poetic? Poetics is a really good, you know, way of thinking about it. You know, what cues are required to make that work, you know, in someone, an audience member.
Sorry, if other people have questions, we're going to have to try to repeat it for the audience.
Oh, of course.
They can't hear whoever's back here. So, thank you.
It's amazing to me. I mean, again, we're in the first place of doing one of these hodgepodge meetings, where it's half online, half in person. So all sorts of learning. Eric, you were going to ask something.
I was.
And I'll repeat it to the best I can.
Is there a wind in here to make this work, or did you consider that, or would you not consider that since it's so far from
Have a fan on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Eric's question was, there's this large wind-operated instrument, and theoretically I could have a fan operating it or a little motor operating it so it would work, and you know, why not do that? And for me, you know, it's, we're about to do install next week, and so, or the week after next, and I actually want to take it down to Ocean Beach and turn it on, you know, in a different environment. But when I built it, the plan was that it would only operate at the South Pole, and so it would just be a kind of, you know, a kind of like a one-off thing. But the conditions at the South Pole were very mild when I was there. It was actually sort of like warm and sunny for the South Pole, you know, minus 17 degrees Celsius kind of thing, so cold, but not crazy cold, and it wasn't very windy. And so it's designed to be driven by the wind, and it was never, the wind was never sufficient to drive it. So I've never actually seen it reach its full potential. So if I had been able to stay at the South Pole for, you know, a month or 2 months, I would have been able to have the conditions that I wanted for it. That's one of the challenges about embedding with the scientific research. I normally only have a certain amount of time to be able to access, and so the conditions weren't right for it when I was there. And so over the years, I've really thought now, and I'd like to actually drive it in other places. It could be located in other places. But for me, it is about engaging with the natural world. So having it operate with a fan just would, you know, be pathetic for me. You know, I really wanted to kind of, you know, I wanted to. I'd love to have out on one of those crazy windy days at Ocean Beach where you don't even want to be on the beach. What's that? Yeah, Twin Peaks would be good too. But
We just take it off.
Yeah. We're going out to Bolinas, you know, over the week for the rest of the weekend. Bolinas would be a good spot for it as well. It's been crazy windy out there, or out on Drake's, you know, Drake's estuary on, you know, on the north of north of you know, Point Reyes would be awesome as well. So there's lots of good places for wind in the Bay Area, that's for sure. Yeah.
Something that really strikes me about this exhibition and this, you know, experience that you had, which is like you having been in the Arctic, you know, is that like we are here like facing highly fabricated, you know, material that they're brought there.
Can I interrupt for a second? Can you take your mask off? I know it's, yeah, it's really hard to hear from this far away.
Like there is a dichotomy here that like we have like these highly fabricated, you know, objects that are taking care of you, and in a space in the planet that is like, you know, at least at this point, like, you know, a little bit less kind of interactive with human beings, you know, and it's more virgin in a way, and then you also have your
and those are the questions about paraphrases. I build these kind of very sort of manufactured, very highly refined instruments, and then take them to these places that are wild and open and untouched in some ways. And, what's my experience as an artist in doing that, or bringing those objects to those spaces? It's a really interesting question, actually, and I think it's part of the reason I work this way is that it's building the objects is my way of getting to understand the space before I get there. I've got to try and imagine myself in that space, so that it's kind of like vehicles for my imagination. And my wife can vouch for the fact that I lose immense amounts of sleep over that. I think, oh my God, the thing I'm building at the moment, the thing I fabricate at the moment, and I'm going to throw it in the Mediterranean Sea and it's going to dive down for a few hundred meters. And I've spent months and months and months building it. It's cost quite a lot of my money. It's cost a lot of money from the place that's supporting me as well. What happens if I lose it? What happens if it just sinks? What happens if the line breaks? And so I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning sweating over this. But for me, that's also exactly the experience that the scientists are having in those environments. They're fabricating these delicate instruments that have to be frozen down to a fraction of a degree above absolute zero to be able to perceive heat radiation coming from the cosmic microwave background radiation. They're building these instruments to operate in these incredibly inimical, challenging, never before experienced places. So I'm emulating them by doing it. I'm kind of going down that path, and it might seem like adoration or something, and it is partly. I'm in awe of what scientists do, but it's also partly in critique or kind of analysis of it as well. Thinking about the human cost of doing all of that. There's a lot of sociology of science at the moment about most of the famous scientists are old white guys like me, old white guy. But there's a huge number of people who put effort in to make that work happen. People from especially the people cleaning the floors and emptying the trash cans and building stuff that comes into building the instruments and things like this. This amazing support structure of hundreds of thousands of people that support these kind of efforts, and that all gets sort of put aside, and the principal investigator is the person who wins the Nobel Prize because of their amazing vision. But there's this amazing support structure behind all that to make it all happen, and the classic one, of course, is behind every great scientist is the wife who's raising the children and kind of encouraging them and supporting them often while they're dedicating themselves to their kind of vision, and that. We all do that. We all support those visions in various ways, and I'm aware of my privilege by being able to go to the Antarctic, to be given the opportunity by the National Science Foundation to be air freighted down there as an artist. It's a huge responsibility, and so many other artists could have gone, but they didn't, because I went. So all of that's in there, all of that's there when I'm walking out into these pristine places. It's the efforts that everyone's gone to get me there, and the responsibility that comes from that as well. It's quite burdensome. And then you've got to trek out through the snow and put up this harebrained thing you've developed and have confidence in yourself that what you're doing is worthwhile or not. So it's not a very good mental state to be in, actually. I suffer quite a lot from my art, but not in the way that most people think. So that's why things like this are important as well. It means that other people are also interested or inspired or excited or
motivated by seeing the work, and that's, gets back to that thing we're talking about with the master's degree, the notion of the community and other people getting excited by the work. That's when the reward happens for me. The actual trekking out into difficult places is mostly a pain. It's mostly uncomfortable. It's mostly full of self-doubt and worry. At least, other people might not have that. Other people might just be totally inspired. But for me, it's traumatic. So I sometimes wonder why I'm doing it. But then every now and then I'll look up and I realise I'm standing at the South Pole. It's like, this is amazing. How did this happen? And so there's these moments of, and I'm sure when I'm in the Mediterranean and being part of this next expedition, it'll just be like, Jacques Cousteau, man, where's my red beret? This is what I dreamt about when I was 12. To be on an expedition ship in the Mediterranean, throwing a submersible over the side. Yes!
You're there.
Yeah. That's Steve Zissou and Jacques Cousteau. I'm right there with you.
Okay, well, I think on that note, that's the most hopeful note we could possibly end upon. Especially my hack job of the sound today. But thank you all for coming out and being here, and give us a few minutes, and we'll take all these chairs away and set the exhibition back up. And those of you at home that didn't make it, come by and see the show.
Saturday, August the 21st, from 1 to 5, last viewing.
Yep, that is correct, August 21st. And then otherwise, I will see you all hopefully at the next one of these, which I believe is October 9th, the next second Saturday Arts Talk with Nassim Moghadam. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for your patience, and I will see you all next time. Thank you so much. Oh, so sorry.